administration this week rolled out new tailpipe emission standards in a move that is shaping up to be a major fault line in the 2024 presidential campaign. The long-awaited rules are designed to ensure that the majority of new passenger cars and light trucks sold in the United States are all electric or hybrids. And while administration officials insist that the standards are not an EV mandate, they do amount to a de facto phase-out of gas-powered cars, which can make up no more than 30% of U.S. auto sales by 2032. Let's bring in our panel, Wall Street Journal columnist Dan Henninger and Kim Strassel, and editorial board member Kyle Peterson. So, Kim, this is a big deal, even though it's regulation, which can be a little bit obscure. Tell us why this actually would operate as a de facto mandate for EVs or a phase-out of gas cars.
Well, because as you noticed in the beginning, Paul, by 2032, the rule says that you cannot have more than 30% of cars produced and sold in the United States, more than 30%. And so what this means is that you're going to have mostly on the market some hybrids, mostly electric vehicles. The few ones that are left are going to be so expensive because they'll be so sought after that most people will not be able to afford them. And then going forward, there won't be allowed to have enough to satisfy the market. Old cars will retire. And so it is essentially a mandate for EV cars.
So you're saying the cars that would be too expensive would be the gas-powered cars, right?
The gas-powered cars, those few that you could still make that were gas-powered, everybody would want. The price would be astronomical, but they just won't be enough to satisfy what is a huge demand in the United States still for internal combustion engines.
Okay. So, Dan, what's driving this? I mean, usually politicians shy away from telling you what you can't do.
No.
You know, can't buy cars. That's generally not good politics. What's driving it?
Democratic politics and democratic obsessions, the obsession being the climate. Anybody who's been paying any attention to politics the last 5 or 10 years realizes the Democrats, in the person, say, of John Kerry, are absolutely obsessed with climate change, okay? And electric vehicles, suppose because they have no tailpipe emissions, are the primary thing that they're going to use to reduce the climate. To make the climate cleaner.
But there's no, really, we don't even know whether or not
doesn't matter.
This would matter a bit to global temperatures.
It is a bit. That's the interesting thing about this. It is such an obsession that the Democrats, this is a political party, supposedly professional politicians, are ignoring a lot of the implications of what they're doing. We've already seen consumer pushback against electric vehicles. And to Kim's point about eventually gas-powered vehicles will be so expensive, the average price today of an electric vehicle, you want to guess? $50,000. And that is one of the reasons consumers aren't buying them. The assumption is that somehow the price will fall over the next 10 years as more charging stations are built. But the politics of this, honestly, do not make a lot of sense for Democrats, but they're determined to force the American public to do it.
Kyle, what about the auto workers? The UAW, United Auto Workers, endorsed this with a long statement of caveats and so on, saying, well, we better put tariffs on foreign cars, too. But this has implications for them, and not good ones.
Definitely, and I guess I'm not surprised that the UAW is with Biden on this because it is a union, it is part of the progressive democratic movement, but I'm curious whether this will create any friction between the union leaders and its members who are more middle of the road, some of them more susceptible to Trump's appeals, and I think people don't vote.
And more susceptible to losing their jobs.
Very, very true.
I mean, Sean Fain, the head of the union, isn't going to lose his job.
Right, exactly. And I think that people don't understand the scale of this quite yet because last year, new auto sales were only about 8% EVs, and half of those were Teslas. And we're talking about a force-fed transition with a lot of money thrown at these auto companies, which, by the way, is part of what is keeping the UAW on board, to get this to something like a majority within a decade. And I agree with Dan. This is terrible politics. And honestly, I wonder how much Joe Biden is really into it. I mean, he's a 1967 Corvette guy. When they find the classified files in his garage, they're not sitting next to his Chevy Bolt. And so this, to me, looks like it is driven by the progressives in the administration.
Kim, the automakers signed off on this. They're for it because between the original proposal and this one, they got a reprieve in the short term for the mandate in first couple of years. But why are the automakers on board for this? Because they know that they're basically losing money on every EV they sell, other than maybe Tesla. They're losing money on those, and they use the sales of gas-powered cars to subsidize EVs.
Yeah, billions, Paul. They're losing billions. Ford lost more than $4 billion on its EV unit last year. But here's the thing. You'll do a lot when you have a gun to your head. And essentially, this is what they've been faced with by the administration, is either, as you say, they can try to play nice and beg for yet more subsidies and try to offset some of those high costs of the EV and limp along, or they can complain and potentially get nothing. And so that's the decision that they have made at the moment. Now, look, I would argue that they'd be better to enforce, speak reality about the actual problems here. But